Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, for part 11, Sheikh N.Wahid Azal returns from the Fatimiyya Sufi order to talk about the teachings of Subh-i-Azal. And I encourage you, if you have not watched parts 1 through 10, please watch them and watch them more than once if you have to, because the knowledge Sheikh N.Wahid is providing us is very prevalent in today's society, a society that's falling apart, lack of knowledge, lack of love. And we need his guidance, the guidance of a sheikh, the guidance of a friend, and the guidance of a well-wisher. And we are grateful to have him back in these series of dialogues and conversations that Sheikh N.Wahid Azal has been blessing us with. And tonight will be basically the continuation of the teachings of the Bayān. And those that are Bayanis, I'm sure, will appreciate this. And those, regardless of their status, will appreciate this gift of knowledge because of what Subh-i-Azal has contributed to our world. So without further ado, Nur alaikum to our beloved Sheikh.
Wa alaikum Nur, and Merry Christmas to those who celebrate it. Happy Saturnalia to those who celebrate that. This week that just went by was the Ayyam Fatimiyya. It's the days that Shia commemorate as being the martyrdom of Zahra, Fatima alayha salam. I was inspired to compose a supplication prayer to her that, you know, people who wish to read it in both the original Arabic and my translation of my own Arabic are welcome to do so. I may, you know, send you a link to that you can then put also in the description box for that. It's on my blog in both versions. Before I begin talking about Subh-i-Azal and his biography, I want to read a prayer of his that I actually recite every day in the mornings. It's from a prayer book of his known as Sahifa al-Hajiyya, the Epistle of Utmost Joy, that was composed in the early 1850s. It's unknown whether this was composed in Iran while he was still in Iran or when he fled to Baghdad. But this is an amazing prayer. I translated it and put it on one of my blogs back in 2012. This was a blog that the Bahā'īs, through the facility and the connivance of Mr. Dale Husband, managed to take down last year, but the translation is there. I may actually make a recitation of this maybe later today and put that also on my YouTube. But let me read this both in the Arabic and my translation of it first. Bismillah al-baril atuf. Allahumma ya badiyu, ya maniyu, ya rafiyu, ya sultanu, ya rahmanu, ya hayyu, ya qayyumu, ya dhal jalal wal ikram, ya dhal jamal wal izam, ya dhal nur wal baha, ya dhal tal'at wa ala, ya dhal izzat wal kibriya, ya dhal qudrat wal baga, ya nuru ya quddus, ya nuru ya sabuhu, ya nuru ya qayyumu, ya nuru ya baduhu, ya nuru ya awwalu, ya nuru ya akharu, ya nuru ya zahiru, ya nuru ya batinu, ya nuru ya aliyu, ya nuru ya qadiru, ya nuru ya muqaddiru, ya nuru ya musawwiru, ya nuru ya musahhilu, ya nuru ya musabbibu, ya nuru ya muyassiru, ya nuru ya mufarrihu, ya nuru ya mufarriju, ya nuru ya mukathiru, ya nuru ya muhawwiru, ya nuru ya mutawwiru, ya nuru ya mukawwiru, ya nuru ya muhayyimu, ya nuru ya muhawwinu, ya nuru ya mubayyinu, ya nuru ya munaqqinu, ya nuru ya mukawwinu, ya nuru ya shadidu, ya nuru ya wahidu, ya nuru ya wasi'u, ya nuru ya rafi'u, ya nuru ya dafi'u, ya nuru ya wasi'u, ya nuru ya shafi'u, ya nuru ya sami'u, ya nuru ya rafi'u, ya nuru ya ka'inu, ya nuru ya kaynunu, ya nuru ya kiyanu, ya nuru ya dayanu, ya nuru ya laqanu, ya nuru ya subhanu, ya nuru ya qudsanu, ya nuru ya azamanu, ya nuru ya mu'utiyu, ya nuru ya mu'alliyu, ya nuru ya muqanniyu, ya nuru ya mukannizu, ya nuru ya musatti'u, ya nuru ya mujammilu, ya nuru ya muna'amu, ya nuru ya mufazzalu, ya nuru ya fazilu, ya nuru ya na'imu, ya nuru ya nawiru, Ya Nuru Ya Sati'u, Ya Nuru Ya Lami'u, Ya Nuru Ya Warisu, Ya Nuru Ya Muba'sa'u, Ya Nuru Ya Qiyasu, Ya Nuru Ya Muqayyisu, Ya Nuru Ya Mustaqasu, Ya Nuru Ya Mu'ayyinu, Ya Nuru Ya Basiru, Ya Nuru Ya Basiru, Ya Nuru Ya Nasiru, Ya Nuru Ya Nasaru, Ya Nuru Ya Fatir, Ya Nuru Ya Satir, Ya Nuru Ya Qafir, Ya Nuru Ya Qahiru, Ya Nuru Ya Sakhiru, Ya Nuru Ya Jabiru, Ya Nuru Ya Mutalla'u, Ya Nuru Ya Mufattahu, Ya Nuru Ya Badi'u, Ya Nuru Ya Badi'u, Ya Nuru Ya Jamilu, Ya Nuru Ya Jalilu, Ya Nuru Ya Fazilu, Ya Nuru Ya Nabilu, Ya Nuru Ya Sarihu, Ya Nuru Ya Qawasu, Ya Nuru Ya Qawsu, Ya Nuru Ya Bazahu, Ya Nuru Ya Bazahu, Ya Nuru Ya Shamihu, Ya Nuru Ya Samiu, Ya Nuru Ya Muqtadiru, Ya Nuru Ya Mufattiru, Ya Nuru Ya Muhayyimu, Ya Nuru Ya Khair al-Fatihin, Ya Nur Ya Khair al-Nasirin, Ya Nur Ya Khair al-Hasibin, Ya Nur Ya Khair al-Jami'in, Ya Nur Ya Khair al-Raziqin. أسألك بنورك وبهائك وجمالك وجلالك أن تفتح لنا أبواب فضلك وتوسع في رزقنا من قبل ومن بعد في كل حين من خزائن منك وأحسانك إنك وسعت رحمتك من في السماوات والأرض وإنك كنت على كل شيء قدير. And the translation: in the name of God, the all-good, the all-giving. Oh my God, oh wondrous, oh invulnerable, oh elevated, oh ruler, oh compassionate, oh alive, oh peerless, oh possessor of majesty and grace, O possessor of beauty and the uttermost mightinesses, O possessor of the light and the splendor, O possessor of the visage and the crowning highnesses, O possessor of the tremendousness and ultimate greatness, O possessor of the power and the subsistence, O light, O holy, O light, O glorified, O light, O peerless, O light, O Badu, O light, O first, O light, O last, O light, O manifest, O light, O hidden, O light, O high, O light, O capable, O light, O predestiner, O light, O giver of form, O light, O giver of ease, O light, O giver of cause, O light, O facilitator, O light, O giver of joy, O light, O giver of relief, O light, O giver of increase, O light, O destroyer, O light, O developer, O light, O encircler, O light, O protector, O light, O alleviator, O light, O exemplifier, O light, O prompter, O light, O giver of being, O light, O intense, O light, O one, O light, O pervasive, O light, O elevator, O light, O repeller, O light, O vast, O light, O healer, O light, O hearer, O light, O sublime, O light, O existentiator, O light, O entifier, O light, O cosmocrator, O light, O judge, O light, O ultimate encounter, O light, O glorified, O light, O sanctified, O light, the most mightiest of the mighty, O light, O bestower, O light, O exalter, O light, O self-sufficient, O light, O maker of treasures, O light, O giver of radiation, O light, O adorner, O light, O benefactor, O light, O eminent in beneficence, O light, O distinguished, O light, O giver of grace, O light, O giver of light, O light, O dazzling, O light, O irradiator, O light inheritor, O light, O causer, O light, O helper, O light, O aider, O light, O aid invoked, O light, O specifier, O light, O seeing, O light, O seer, O light, O victorious, O light, the most victorious, O light, O creator, O light, O coverer, O light, O forgiver, O light, O triumphant, O light, O irradiant, O light, O compelling predestiner, O light, O well-informed, O light, O unlocker, O light, O dawning, O light, O commencer, O light, O beautiful, O light, O majestic, O light, O gracious, O light, O noble, O light, O helper, O light, O succorer, O light, O succoring, O light, O splendiferous, O light, O splendid, O light, O lofty, O light, O hearing, O light, O competent, O light, O fashioner, O light, O protector, O light, O best of all victorious, O light, O best of all reckoners, O light, O best of all comprisers, O light, O best of all sustainers. I ask thee by thy light and thy splendor and thy beauty and thy majesty that thou open us to us the gates of thy grace and expand for us our sustenance from before and after in every moment from the treasuries of thy bounty and elegances. Verily thy mercy encompasses whatsoever is in the heavens and in the earth, for verily thou art powerful over all things. This is a prayer, like I said, composed sometime in the early 1850s. We don't know whether it was in Iran or in Baghdad when he got there in 1852, 1853. I first found this prayer in a compilation in around 2010 and started using it, and I've been using it consistently every single day since that time. It is really powerful, energizing prayer, short, compared to some of the other longer prayers we have in these compilations. But it really hits a home run for me every morning.
Definitely. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar.
Indeed.
That's the only response I have to that. That is absolutely beautiful, Sheikh.
Yeah, it is. I'll put it back up in the blog. I think I may have put it up in another one of the books, but I put it up on the main blog again for people who want to look at it, both in the translation and the original Arabic.
Please, so that would be wonderful.
So this
reminds me a lot. This reminds me a lot of those the names that you did, the 300 names. Yes, it has the same. Yeah. It has the same power behind it.
Yes, it does. It does. All of these prayers, whether by the Bab or Subh-i-Azal, they really, all of them pack a real punch. These du'as.
Thank you, Sheikh.
Yeah. So it's my pleasure. I will read two more of Subh-i-Azal's prayer. These next ones that I will read later are in translation. I'll skip the Arabic. But let's get to Subh-i-Azal's biography. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the biographical section of my article, Invoking the Seven Worlds, that was published in 2013 in the now defunct journal Luva. Before I read this, I should actually mention that if you go online and you search Subh-i-Azal, usually you're going to hit a lot of the Baha'i propaganda, a lot of the Baha'i historical whitewashes of the history. Up until probably 1920s, this biography of Subh-i-Azal and the whole narrative of the Bayān and the Bahā'īs was still pretty balanced because of the fact that you had two notable scholars, one a Frenchman, the other one an Englishman. The first one, Edward Granville Browne of Cambridge University, and then the French diplomat Ailem Nicolas, who were still alive and who had written extensively about the Bayān. Nicolas had actually translated the Persian Bayān and the Bab's 7 proofs and the Arabic Bayān into French. The Persian Bayān he actually translated in 4 volumes. And Nicolas also wrote probably the most extensive biography in existence that we have about the Bab, which was translated into Persian by a Bayani, Ali Muhammad Farah Bashi. But this thing should, I think, in the hands of a capable translator, find a translation in English as well, because it has still not been superseded as a biography of the Bab. There are a few problems here and there with it that can be really easily rectified within the notes and critical comments and prefaces and introduction. But Nicolas' work is outstanding. He also wrote and published a number of articles, one of which in English translation would be Who is the Successor of the Bab? That is also a very important article for people who read French to look at, because Nicolas lays out the case in black and white. with the documentation. His conclusion is pretty unequivocal that what the Baha'is claim is basically nonsense, and that Subh-i-Azal was the legitimate successor of the Bab, and the Baha'is had gone out of their way to basically demonize Subh-i-Azal. But since the passing of Edward Granville Browne and A.L.M. Nicholas, as the Baha'i organization got more and more powerful in the West and attracted more and more converts, over the last 60, 70 years, they have gone out of their way to basically push their own very tendentious narratives about Babism and their demonization of Subh-i-Azal as a result, to the point that the scholar Denis MacEoin in the 1970s, when he wrote his dissertation and was publishing his articles, basically was run out of the academy in the early 80s because of the publications that he was publishing. He subsequently went on and had a very lucrative and successful career in writing fiction. But this is the lengths that the Baha'i organization has gone to suppress the narrative of Subh-i-Azal, to suppress the true narrative of Babism. And the situation today is as bad as it has ever been. And because, in my opinion, the university system in the ivory tower has become neoliberalized, it has become corrupted. So scholarship is now based on funding, and whoever, basically grants funding to a department or a program or a chair that you're part of, you will sing their tunes, whatever it is. And so what this has created a situation is that anybody who wishes to work on Babism based on the early manuscripts and to write biographies of Subh-i-Azal and whatnot in the West is basically suppressed. One gentleman at Cambridge University that Sayyid Miqdad al-Nabavi Razavi put me in touch with back in the early part of the last decade. He had written his master's dissertation on the role of the Azalis in the Iranian constitutional revolution. And he basically wrote the stuff that we already knew, many of which was already covered by the Iranian scholar Janet Afari in her book on the Iranian constitutional revolution. This master's dissertation merely augmented with better sourcing some of the arguments that Janet Afari had already put in her dissertation. This gentleman confessed to me that subsequently, after he got his master's degree and attempted to publish this thing, he was met by resistance by every conceivable publisher and reviewer out there. This situation has not changed. My friend, Sayyid Miqdad Nabavi Razavi, who is a very successful historian in Iran, and he's published, I think it's getting close to almost 20 books that he's published in Farsi on the subject, attempted to come to the West to do a PhD here. And the kind of resistance that he found as a result, whether from the Brits or even in mainland Europe, from the Germans, was unbelievable, because I was trying to help him to get into a PhD program. Thankfully, he has a lucrative career, and his scholarship, as controversial as it is, stands in its own. So there's nothing anybody can take away from him. So in my opinion, he doesn't need a PhD, but if he decides to do a PhD, should, I think, do it in Iran, because we're living in a chaotic situation. I addressed this in the organizational hierarchy paper that I've linked in the description box, that we're living in a situation where in the West, you have no freedom, academic or scholarly freedom in the West at all, to objectively write about this topic, but where under the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is an authoritarian, oppressive state, people have far more latitude and freedom to actually write about this topic than in the West. In the West, the reason is obvious, because the Baha'i organization has infiltrated many of its own people into the academic establishment and also the academic publishing world. They are everywhere. And so one of the experiences that I had, that I wrote in the foreword to my organizational hierarchy paper in 2017, is even though you tell these journals, that, please, if you're going to do blind peer review of an article that I have composed on the Subh-i-Azal or the Bayān or the subject, please send it to neutral reviewers and neutral referees. Well, they can't find any. And the problem with publishing outfits like E.J. Brill is that the Baha'is have placed all of their own people everywhere throughout all the various religious oriented topics and journals and publications. So journal editors who are not very clued in on the politics and the dynamics of this thing will send it automatically to people who are Baha'is, who are in this academic establishment. My article that had no problems with it, and it was based on actually an article on the same topic that was published in Iran by my friend Sayyid Miqdad Nawavi, was sent to Mr. Mujan Momen, a well-known Baha'i scholar. He's not an academic, he's an MD, but he's a scholar. And also to Nekati Alkan, a Baha'i scholar that lives in Germany, as well as, I believe it was Sajjad Rezvi, who was at Exeter University, and these were the three reviewers. Although I wasn't supposed to know who these reviewers are, I actually figured out who the reviewers were on my own. And the reviews, the refereed reviews that they sent to this editor were so tendentious and biased and revealing of the fact the two Baha'i reviewers especially revealed their complete sectarian animus, that you kind of wondered that in institutions of academic learning that the ivory tower of the West prides itself in, how they can justify retaining people such as Momen or Nekati Alkan on their role of referees, to dismiss an article that was complete, everything in it was sourced based on original source documents, many of which are online, which were all linked, etc. But that's the situation. I ended up, unfortunately, having a big brouhaha, an argument with the editor on email subsequently. But that's what these people do, is they basically infest and they act like waswas, evil whispers into the ears of these people. And rather than these people who are professionals, apparently, assessing the situation themselves objectively, will basically fall into line with the Baha'is, because the Baha'is are a powerful organization. They have money and they have influence. And obviously they have all kinds of people in these establishments that they can basically then either bully or browbeat or whatnot these individuals into quiet. So this is the situation we find ourselves. Although, my aim and some other people has been to write an extensive critical biography of Subh-i-Azal. Maybe, inshallah, this will come in the near future, we shall see. But as of now, the only extensive English language biography that we have is what I'm going to basically read for you, which is the biographical section of my paper, Invoking the Seven Worlds. So let me just, without further ado, start reading this. Subh-i-Azal, his preeminent title in reference to the fifth theophanic sequence of the Hadith Kumel, or the Hadith al-Haqiqa, Mīrzā Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, died 1912, was born in the Arab quarter of Tehran in 1831 during the final years of the reign of Fath Ali Shah Qajar, who died in 1834. He was the son of the wealthy Mazandarani Qajar courtier and calligrapher Mīrzā Abbas Buzurg Taguri Nuri Ibn Reza Qoli Beg, who died in 1834, and his sixth wife, Kuchak Khanum Kermanshahi, a Kurd, who died during childbirth. So Subh-i-Azal's mother was a Kurdish lady. After his birth, Subh-i-Azal was entrusted to the care of his father's fifth wife, Khadija Khanum, the mother of Mīrzā Hussain Ali Nuri and future Baha'u'llah. So Subh-i-Azal's mother died at childbirth while giving birth to Subh-i-Azal. Mm-hmm. And the caregiving of Subh-i-Azal, according to Nuqtat al-Qab, is a very interesting story. According to this story that is recounted in the book of the Point of Qaf, after the death of the mother of Subh-i-Azal at birth, the mother of Baha'u'llah and soon to be stepmother of Subh-i-Azal had a dream of the Prophet Muhammad and Ali, upon them be peace, who came to her in the dream and said to her and gave her this child and instructed her to protect and be the stepmother and caregiver for this child until the coming of the Ghaib, until the coming of the ariser, the hidden Imam. After his birth, Subh-i-Azal was entrusted, like I said, to the care of his father's fifth wife, Khadija Khanum, who died in 1844, the mother of Mīrzā Hussain Ali Nuri and future Baha'u'llah. Before his third birthday, and at the commencement of the reign of Muhammad Shah Qajar, who died in 1848, Subh-i-Azal's father also died, and it appears that his care and upbringing were from this period onwards, henceforth entrusted jointly to his stepmother and his aforementioned stepbrother, who was 13 years his senior. In the same year as the commencement of the Babi movement in 1844-1845, his stepmother, Khadija Khanum, also died as well, and the guardianship of Subh-i-Azal, now 14 years of age in 1844-1845, devolved upon his older stepbrother and future rival. Of his younger stepbrother during these early years, the future founder of the Baha'i religion and future rival of Subh-i-Azal, per a direct quotation in Kitab al-Nuqtat al-Kaf, the book of the point of Ka, recounts, quote, I was engaged with the upbringing and education of His Eminence the Pre-Eternal, Jalal Azal. Traces of the pure innate nature, fitra, and goodliness of character were manifest from the mirror of his being, and he always preferred dignity, poise, good manners, and modesty. He refrained from mixing in the company of children or engaging in their behavior. But I did not realize he would one day become the possessor of such a distinctly high station. He studied Persian literature, but did not take well to Arabic and excelled in the calligraphy of Nastali. This is a calligraphic style of Persian script. The poetry of the folk of Gnosis and the divine unicity, Ahl Ma'rifat wa Tawheed, appealed to him, unquote. This is my translation from Nuqtat al-Kaf. According to Subh-i-Azal's own testimony, his conversion to Babism occurred approximately during the period when the movement was gaining its formative momentum and building its base of converts in the 1844 to 1846 period. As urban notables and members of the landed gentry, what specifically attracted the initial Babi emissaries to the Nūrī household in Tehran remains somewhat opaque in details, because the Nūrī household weren't particularly known to be part of any active Shaykhi networks from which the bulk of the initial Babi membership and specifically its missionary activists were mostly drawn. Nevertheless, Subh-i-Azal states, quote, this is from Nuqtat al-Kaf again, quote, at the beginning when the manifestation, suhul, of the cause of His Holiness the Bab occurred, I had desired upon engaging in emulation of one among the learned clerics of religion. I was investigating their ranks and stations at the very time His Eminence, my brother, i.e. Baha'u'llah, was bringing the companions of His Holiness the Bab to our house. At night, they would converse and read from his writings, and I would retire to a corner listening intently. Until one night, they read from one of his prayers, where the refrain, and oh my God, ya ilahi, was copiously strewn within it. The magnetic spiritual attraction of the spirit of those words caught my heart, and as a consequence, love for His Holiness took firm hold. Later, I perused the traditions, ahadith of the Imams of religion, and looked upon the perspicuous writings of His Holiness, and I testified in certainty to the truth of the Babi cause. My translation, unquote. In 1847, when the Bab bid his followers to join his initial disciple in Khurasan, the first letter of the living, Mullah Hussein Bushri Babul Bab, died in 1849, Subh-i-Azal, then a young adolescent of 15 years of age, immediately set out on his own from Tehran to join the other Babi partisans assembling there. On his way, he was intercepted by his older brother, who redirected him back to Tehran, and from there they soon advanced together towards Mazandaran in the north, where en route they were met by the Bab's most eminent female and most radical disciple, celebrated as the remover of the veil and renowned for being second to the Bab himself in influence, the 17th letter of the living, Tahir Quratul Ain, died 1852, who was deemed to be none other than the return of Fatima Zahra alayha salam, the Prophet Muhammad's daughter. In Sabzevar, they were joined by the last letter of the living, Mullah Muhammad Ali Bar Furushi Quddus, died 1849, also known as the last name of God, Ismullah al-Akhir, who had been the Bab's companion on the Hajj journey with him in 1844-1845, and esteemed by some as even equal in spiritual rank to him. However, Subh-i-Azal himself was only to spend exclusive time in Quddus's presence in Barfurush only after the gathering at Badasht. Nevertheless, Haji Mīrzā Jānī's account in Nuqtat al-Kaf, the book of the point of Kaf, explicitly suggests that special attention was showered upon Subh-i-Azal personally by Quddus during his brief time in Barfush. And this is very significant. Given the Nuri family's increasing prominence within the movement, Subh-i-Azal and his older brother remained in continual contact, if not proximity, of these two foremost Babi leaders leading up to the late summer of 1848, just after the conclusion of the gathering at Badas, where the Babi Qiyamah had been proclaimed publicly. And the beginnings of the Sheikh Tabarsi uprising were now beginning to stir. Horatul aim was to remain in the company of the Nuris in their ancestral home of Nur, Mazandaran, while Quddus was to proceed to the shrine fortress of Sheikh Tabarsi to join Mullah Hussein Bushri and ultimately become the foremost spiritual leader and later the most eminent martyr of that uprising. Here, Subh-i-Azal, who was later to be lauded as the return of Quddus, was to be separated from Mullah Muhammad Ali Barfushi permanently and returned to Tehran. During this sojourn, he had become quite attached to Quddus in a typically close master-disciple type spiritual relationship and bond. Nuqtat al-Kaf, the book of the point of Kaf, relates, quote, he, Subh-i-Azal, possessed a strange attachment to His Holiness Quddus. In a sweet, melodious voice, he would often recite with the utmost joy the sermons and prayers of the master of that master of contingency, where his listeners would be made to taste soul and the spirit of life from the chalice of ecstatic attraction. When in the space of approximately 40 days, news of the martyrdom of Quddus reached that eminent Subh-i-Azal, I heard afterwards that upon hearing the news, for 3 days, an intense fever overtook that eminence, the intensity of whose fiery heat would not subside. Then after 3 days, the traces of holiness, al-Sara Qudsi, dawned in the holy temple or form, the haykal of that eminence, Subh-i-Azal, and the meaning of return became manifest, unquote. Subh-i-Azal and his older brother weren't to participate in the bloody uprising at Sheikh Tabarsi, nor the ones that later broke out in Zanjan and Neiris, but not for want of trying. He, his older brother, one of their Babi uncles, and other family were together apprehended by government forces on their way to the shrine forces, some distance from the town of Amul, and delivered over to the governor, who imprisoned them in a local mosque. Subh-i-Azal escaped and spent the whole night in the forests of vicinity and was discovered by hostile townspeople the next morning, who mistreated him with taunts and spitting before delivering him over to the authorities. Reunited with his kin, the governor ordered all the apprehended to be bastinado. That means that they were, you basically tied down and beat on the soles of your feet with a large stick. Mm-hmm. When it came Subh-i-Azal's turn, his older brother pleaded with the authorities to be beaten in his stead. After the beatings, learning of their eminent social rank and position as landed gentry and former courtiers, the governor released them. Now, although the exclusive correspondence between the Bab and Subh-i-Azal wasn't to commence in earnest until after the Sheikh Tabarsi uprising, late spring of 1849, and people can look at that because I have translated this correspondence. There's no question for us that the two foremost Babi leaders, Quddus and Horatul Ain, had independently made specific introductions with the Bab on his behalf during the period when they were in each other's proximity. Thus, after the defeat and bloody massacre of the remaining Babis at Sheikh Tabarsi, especially of Quddus in a mob-induced slaughter at the public square in Barfush, the Bab, now in remotest Shahriq, was robbed of two of his most distinguished, able-bodied lieutenants and spiritual deputies, not to mention countless other followers. With his own life now hanging in the balance following his trial and condemnation for heresy in Tabriz in July 1848, the issue of succession would have certainly been an overriding concern. Haji Mīrzā Jānī relates, quote, after the martyrdom of His Holiness Quddus and that of his companions at Sheikh Tabarsi, that illustrious one, Subh-i-Azal, became mournful and despondent until such time as the writing of His Eminence, the Pre-Eternal, attained the blessed notice of the Bab. From the intensity of joy, several times the Bab rose up from his place and then sat down again, offering thanksgiving and praise to the presence of the one worship, as the Ma'bud, i.e. God. Unquote, my translation. These writings of Subh-i-Azal were soon esteemed by the Bab as divinely inspired, i.e. versical signs or ayat issuing from the former's pure innate knowledge or fitra. And so in a series of testamentary epistles that were publicized widely among the scattered Babi ecclesia, its remaining leadership and hierarchy, Subh-i-Azal was formally nominated as the Bab's successor, legatee, wasi, and mirror, mir'at, whose status would be equal to the Bab's. This with a distinction in an operative theophanic function whereby the Bab was the point, nokta, the inaugurator of the cycle of the Bayān, and Subh-i-Azal, the mirror of the Bayān, its executor, mirror, and embodiment. In other words, Subh-i-Azal was to be Ali to the Bab's Muhammad. Reminiscent of Ismaili categories and terms, during the remaining lifetime of the Bab, less than a year, he, the Bab, would act as the speaker or natiq, while Subh-i-Azal would be the silent one, samit. Upon the Bab's physical demise, Subh-i-Azal would be elevated to the rank of speaker, natiq, and all the writings of the Bab would henceforth function now as the silent one, samit, in the face of the speaking mirror or the speaking Bayān, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, who is now elevated as the foremost official divine interpreter, soul, hierophant, providential guide, wali, and expositor, mubayyan, of the new religious dispensation and its scriptural text. Hence, the title mirror, mir'at. I'll quote it again. It's worth quoting here a few passages of what the Bab said to Subh-i-Azal in these testamentary epistles, which I quoted last time, but I'll do so again. Thou art I, and I am thou. Anta, ana, wa ana anta. He and I. Huwa wa anna. He and thee. Huwa wa anta. God, and I am God, and you are God. Allah, wa ana Allah, wa anta Allah. This is a book from God, the protector, the peerless, self-subsistent, unto God, the protector, the peerless, self-subsistent. This is a book from Ali before Nabil, the remembrance to the worlds, i.e. the Bab, unto he whose name is equivalent to the name of the one, Wahid, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, the remembrance to the worlds. O name of the one, Ya Ismail Wahid, protect that which has been revealed in the Bayān and command by it, for verily thou art the mighty way of truth. O name of the pre-eternal, Ya Ismail Azal, verily I testify that there is no other God besides me, the tremendous, the best beloved, that I testify that there is no other God besides thee, the protector, the peerless, self-subsistent. God created all which he created from a firstness before all firstness to him, and all things he shall create from a lastness without a lastness unto him, in order to manifest his own logos self. When you are cut off from this throne, i.e. the Bab, recite the versical signs, ayat, God causes to be inspired into your heart. Whomsoever attains the presence of the throne of thy lordship has attained to the presence of God. Proclaim the cause of thy Lord unto the worlds. Call them to that which has been revealed in the Bayān through the perspicuous paths of lofty might. And if God manifests one like unto thee, he is accounted by God as the one singular inheritor of the cause. And if God manifests grandeur in thy days, manifest the 8 paths, the 8 remaining chapters of the Arabic Bayān, which Subh-i-Azal never did. We have made the distributor of the tablets which have been written of the versical signs, ayat of God, a deliverance to the one supreme, Wahid al-A'la, i.e. Subh-i-Azal. My translation, unquote. To his older brother and future rival, the Bab had instructed and unequivocally enjoined the protection of Subh-i-Azal, his authority and writings, saying in an epistle that exists in the original hand of the Bab himself, quote, from the element of the most splendorous, namely Yaḥyā, Subh-i-Azal, the written tablets which have self-disclosed from the simple substance of ecstatic divine attraction were perused. Thanks be the disclosure of majesty, majestic and tremendous be he. Exercise the utmost watchfulness over the spirit and vitality of that considered one, so that the fierce simoon wings do not settle upon the heart of that inhabitant. And in the work of writing and dictation, the means of joy and delight in the acme of perfection should be facilitated for his sake, such that he absolutely never ever beholds any grief or sorrow, neither secretly nor openly, and take the utmost care of him and his compiled works until thy own time arrives, until the end of your life. For God is with the patients. Unquote, my translation. At noon on July 8th, 1850, the Bab, together with a disciple, were publicly executed by firing squad in the Tabriz military barracks by the regiment commanded by Mīrzā Taqī Khan Amir Kabir Sadr-e-Azam. The mangled bodies of the Bab and his disciples were then hung and displayed at the city gates for several days until secretly retrieved by Babi agents, exercising bribery, trickery, and guile, who then delivered them over to Subh-i-Azal, who buried them with his own hands in Tehran. Afterwards, Subh-i-Azal traveled with his older brother to Noor in Mazandaran, where he would tarry for some time. Earlier, as a token of his bestowal of succession upon Subh-i-Azal, the Bab had sent over to his successor his writings, pen case, papers, clothing, and personal effects, copies of the testamentary epistles sealed by him, and importantly, his official seals and signet ring, as well as a heykal, a pentalpha talisman, consisting of 350 permutations of the divine attribute Baha, splendor, 350 being the numerical value of the word raf, to raise to life or to boost up. Thus began the tumultuous first 18 years of Subh-i-Azal's ministry that would eventually culminate in a bloody schism from within his own family and turn the Bayān, Babism apart from the inside, in a manner the Qajar straight clergy persecution in Iran could have scarcely anticipated. Here we have also entered a period of what Denis MacEoin has labeled Middle Babism. Now, as supreme head of the Babi ecclesia, with Babi uprising raging in Zanjan and then ending and starting up again in Mīrīz, with the persecution of this community by the combined forces of the state and clergy become ever more fierce by the day, upon the Bab's martyrdom in July 1815, the 20-year-old Subh-i-Azal found the community were due to lack of any order, discipline, or central command. In the words of Edward Granville Browne, quote, each member had become a law unto himself, producing as many manifestations as there were Bahāʾīs, unquote. In this situation, Subh-i-Azal was encountering challenges to his leadership from its very inception and from every corner. While the remaining inner core of the Babi hierarchy recognized the legitimacy of the Bab's designation of Subh-i-Azal as mirror of the Bayān and the overriding authority vested in that designation, not to mention the Bab's explicit command to Subh-i-Azal himself in the will and testament to preserve himself at any cost, nevertheless, below the inner rung of this circle, one by one, soon after the Bab's execution, there began emerging various claimants to divine theophany and manifestation. Some claimant to the supreme authority itself as the Babi Messiah, Man Yusrullah. This situation was due in large measure given the fact that the late, and some have called the mature doctrinal works of the Bab, especially the Arabic and Persian Bayāns, where the ordinances as well as the features of the Babi eschatology were laid out, seemingly weren't disseminated or made to trickle down far enough below these inner rung of circles close to the top. But this was not due to any attempted concealment or caprice on the part of the Babi leadership. Rather, this was so to some degree because the state and clerical enemies of the Babis were systematically destroying any and all works of the Bab and his early companions they could seize their hands upon. And since many of the original high leadership at the time were either dead, incarcerated, silenced, hunted down, or otherwise in hiding and on the run, leaving meager numbers around Subh-i-Azal, this added more to the general confusion and disarray prevailing at the time among the rank and file Bahā'i's. Haji Mīrzā Jani, spending the last 3 chapters of his Nuqtat al-Qaf, the book of the point of Qaf, discussing several of these claimants in turn, attempts in his overall summation of the situation to minimize the overall impact of such manifestations, quote unquote, vis-a-vis Subh-i-Azal's authority as divine mirror. Ultimately characterizing them as mere theophanies overshadowed by the blessed tree of pre-eternity, Shajariyya Mubarakiyya Azaliyya, i.e. Subh-i-Azal. Yet these were only minor preludes of what was to come in due course, the infernal flowering of which the author of Nuqtat al-Kaf was thankfully or not to witness for himself. Because through the planning and calibration of his older brother, Mīrzā Husayn Ali Nūrī Bahā'u'llah, who was the main organizer of this event, on the morning of August 15, 1852, a group of 6 to 7 Bahā'īs, primitively armed with bad handheld muskets and knives, and seeking to avenge the martyrdom of the Bāb, waited outside the gates of Nasiruddin Shah Qajar's Niavaran Palace in Tehran. As the Shah rode out of the palace gates on his horse, the would-be Babi assassins acted and attempted to ambush him and finish him off. Unfortunately, they failed to achieve their objective, only managing to pull the king off his horse, and soon overpowered by the palace guards, instead only injured him. At this time, following a dispute in Thakur, instigated by a non-Babi relative and uncle, for purposes of opportunistic gain that quickly escalated into a huge political disturbance in Thakur, Nur of Mazandaran, Subh-i-Azal was on his way traveling back to Nur, the province of Nur, his home, back to the capital. Learning of the events and of his older brother's involvement in the assassination plot and then arrest, and although not personally involved, learning also that he had been personally named as one of the plot's instigators by authorities, perhaps he was announced by the same aforementioned opportunist relative who had meanwhile made his own way to Tehran. Halfway to Tehran, Subh-i-Azal redirected course towards Rasht, and now dressing as a wandering dervish in order to remain incognito with an official price on his head, Subh-i-Azal made his way out of Iran and on to Karbala in Iraq, and then to Baghdad, where he would only later be joined by his older brother. The aftermath of the botched assassination attempt on Nasiruddin Shah was bloody, brutal, and decisive. All of the remaining Babi leadership hiding in the city or otherwise under custody were soon killed en masse. Amongst these were Qurratul Ayn, Agha Hossein Yazdi, a letter of the living, Mullah Abdul Karim Qazvini, a letter of the living, famously Haj Suleiman Khan Tabrizi, the author of Nuqtat al-Kaf himself, Haji Mīrzā Yaḥyā Kashani, Sheikh Azim Torshizi, a very able lieutenant of the Babs, and many others besides. The ferociousness of the Qajar state's retaliation against the Babis was merciless and unforgiving, leaving the Babi leadership inside Iran completely decimated from there on out. A leadership who now was forced to relocate its base of operations to Baghdad. With the establishment of the seat of the Babi Ecclesia in Baghdad in late 1852, the internal political challenges to Subh-i-Azal's leadership did not end. But first, due to the explicit instructions of the Bab, Subh-i-Azal was to adopt a policy of complete protective isolation, with his older brother and other family members in Baghdad acting as intermediaries between him, the community, and the outside world. In this, adopting a policy of taqiyya, he was compared to the hidden 12th Imam of Shi'ism during the period of the Lesser Occultation, i.e. the Imam who sought concealment from his enemies and only acted through the intermediary of his 4 deputy gates, Abwab Arba'a, or Wukala, wherein during most of the Baghdad period of 1852 to 1863, Subh-i-Azal was generally characterized by the Babi Ecclesia as being the quote-unquote hidden Azal. Due to this, it appears that several individuals, including Subh-i-Azal's older brother Bahā'u'llah, took advantage of the situation and began advancing various theophanic claims on their own behalf. Although he publicly at least denied the charge, nevertheless, Bahā'u'llah was run out of Baghdad, even though technically Subh-i-Azal's official patron and intermediary on the Bab's explicit instructions, and ran over to remote Sulaimania in Iraqi Kurdistan for 2 years, between 1854 and 1856. This was done by some of the prominent Babis, the witnesses of the Bayān, who would come now to Iraq and would charge Subh-i-Azal's older brother with making precisely such claims to independent theophanic authority. Meanwhile, Mīrzā Yaḥyā, one of the Bab's later prominent disciples, learned in Syriac, ancient Syriac, Arabic as well as Hebrew, and well known as an adept of the occult sciences, who had also been explicitly instructed by the Bab to act as Subh-i-Azal's protector, scribe, and intermediary, suddenly began advancing claims to supreme theophanic authority as the Babi Messiah himself. This forced Subh-i-Azal to pen his forceful refutation entitled the Kitab al-Mustaqis, the Book of the Awakened Sleeper. According to Mīrzā Yaḥyā Nūrī, the stepsister of Subh-i-Azal and Baha'u'llah, additionally to this, Bayān, upon making his claim, had also unequivocally denounced the Bab in the most explicitly unseemly terms and destroyed those handwritten works of the Bab in his possession. And this is what forced Subh-i-Azal's hand more than anything. Following Subh-i-Azal's summons to him to come back from Iraqi Kurdistan, with Bayān now in Baghdad, upon Baha'u'llah's return from Sulaimania, matters came to a head. Deputized to interview Bayān personally to ascertain his claims, following the lengthy meeting's conclusion on Baha'u'llah's explicit instructions, Bayān, together with a disciple, were then immediately murdered by one of the servants of Baha'u'llah, one Muhammad Mazandarani. With the most serious contender yet now out of the way, the stage was finally set for what the Bayani sources have characterized as the direful mischief, Fitniya Seylam. Subh-i-Azal now retreating again into seclusion to undertake the compilation, preservation, and copying of the works of the Bab, as well as to compose more of his own writings and to pursue his correspondence with the Babi Ecclesia in Iran and elsewhere, rarely granting audiences other than to the most notable of his loyalists, the witnesses of the Bayān, and with the Bayān episode now behind them, Baha'u'llah found himself in possession of considerable authority and prestige, with the effective machinery of the Babi leadership now completely and exclusively in his hands. Between 1856 to 1863, when the Nuri family took flight from Baghdad to Ottoman Turkey, bit by bit, Baha'u'llah undermined Subh-i-Azal's authority, quietly, surreptitiously, and in total stealth at first, carefully building his power base and material resources, secretly attracting his future cadre of devoted supporters, which are all basically dregs of society, publicly disavowing any claims attributed to him whenever the rumors circulated, and all the while, once again, acting as Subh-i-Azal's chief intermediary, foremost agent, benefactor, and protector, determining who was and who was not to have access to him and controlling what was and what was not going to pass his notice. While this was going on, all of the Iranian government sources, as well as many of the Bayani sources, claim on pretty good evidence that Baha'u'llah had basically, during this time, created a mafia, a personal mafia for himself. And these were his followers. Outwardly in speech and writing during this time, Baha'u'llah declared complete spiritual servitude and obeisance to Subh-i-Azal, his younger half-brother. Here, it is worth quoting from some of his own words of the period from his Baghdad-era will and testament. To wit, quote, this is Baha'u'llah. Hear the call of the most holy leaf, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, speaking unto thee from behind the veils, for it is he who is the one whom God, i.e. the Bab, has appointed as the peerless, the self-subsistent. Verily, he is the pre-eternal luminary. Whomsoever turns aside from him hath perished. He is the white hand and the Sinaitic mount for the Israel of the Bayān. There is no God but he, the living, the powerful, the peerless, the self-subsistent. God hath ordained in the book that after the remembrance, i.e. the Bab, that all should turn themselves towards the axis of this cause, i.e. Subh-i-Azal. O people of the Bayān, can anyone produce like verses as unto those revealed in the book? Verily, the remnant of God, Baqiyatullah, in these days is the ascendant light, i.e. Subh-i-Azal. Witness in your hearts that appearance of the ascendant light, for that the remnant of God will appear in Mustaghas, i.e. 2001, i.e. the future Babi Messiah, is indeed the real truth, regarding which there is no doubt. And verily, we are all among the expectant. Say, Is not the face of light, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, sufficient unto ye all, who is seen from behind the veils of glory by command from God, the all-seeing, the peerless, self-subsistent? O people, have I not summoned ye unto God and his merciful signs and unto the ascendant light, i.e. Subh-i-Azal? Upon you be the remembrance, i.e. the Bab, and on those who prostrate themselves before the face of God, watch Allah, i.e. Subh-i-Azal. Verily, God hath made that Joseph the ascendant light, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, the sovereign of the true one in the city of the Bayān. But the people are as dead, concealing themselves within the veils of their own base egos. For verily, the leaves of these pages are proof of my servitude to his face, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, would ye but know it. Otherwise, destroy those epistles in the river, so that those in the realm of contingency might bear witness to the verses of God, their Lord, i.e. Subh-i-Azal, unquote, my translation. Initially, the theophanic claim first put forward by Baha'u'llah in the late Baghdad period, the late 1850s, early 1860s, was the Husseyniyat, the return of Imam Hussein. So Baha'u'llah was at first claiming to be the return of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and not specifically to the supreme theophanic authority as the Babi Messiah. According to the family sources, as well as several other Bayani ones, and contrary to the official Baha'i narrative projected retrospectively, Baha'u'llah has certainly not made any explicit claims to this supreme authority publicly, at least until at least during the period of April 1863, just on the eve of his departure from Baghdad in May of that year. This was to come in Aderna or Adrianople on the Black Sea coast in Ottoman Turkey only 2-3 years later. Under pressure from the Iranian government to remove them, the Bahā'i's, from near the proximity of its borders because of the criminal mafioso network that Baha'u'llah had created in Baghdad, in early 1863, the Ottoman government agreed to remove the presence of the Babi leadership from Baghdad and to resettle them on Ottoman and Turkish soil far removed from Iranian territorial borders. The Nūrīs, their households, and those devotees who followed them into the Ottoman exile were first resettled by the Sublime Porte, that is the official seat of the Turkish government in Istanbul. And shortly thereafter, in November 1863, they were resettled in Aderna on the Black Sea coast. At this earliest juncture of the Ottoman exile, Baha'u'llah was still officially acting in the capacity of Subh-i-Azal's protector and intermediary. However, given that the number of the prominent Babi loyalists around Subh-i-Azal in Derni had substantially decreased, where the numbers of actual supporters and partisans present now were now stacked more in Baha'u'llah's numerical favor rather than Subh-i-Azal, from 1864 to 1867, the nature of the claims put forth by Baha'u'llah became bolder and more daring by the day, until by early 1867, he had emphatically made the claim to the supreme theophanic authority itself as the Babi Messiah, and had his circle of partisans publicly assent to it. Given that the effective machinery and apparatus of the Babi leadership was already in his hands, this challenge to Subh-i-Azal's authority proved like none other than before it. Now, before I go on, if people have paid attention to this last paragraph, this shows that the emergence of the Baha'i creed was effectively a coup d'etat, an internal coup d'etat by Mīrzā Hussain Ali Nūr Baha'u'llah against Subh-i-Azal. Subh-i-Azal immediately and unequivocally denounced his older brother's claims, verbally and in writing, once it had been made explicit. As it was further publicized amongst the Babi ecclesia in Iraq and Iran, the written refutations to these claims poured in from all directions by the other prominent loyalists of Subh-i-Azal, which only escalated matters into outright communal violence, murder, mayhem, and unparalleled treachery on the part of the Baha'i zealots, all under command and instructions of Baha'u'llah himself. The complete split of the two factions was effected by September 1867. Two notable attempts to have Subh-i-Azal murdered by the Baha'is failed at each attempt. Other loyalists of Subh-i-Azal were not so lucky. E.G. Browne summarized Kitab al-Hashbehesht, the Eight Heavens, states, quote, all prominent supporters of Subh-i-Azal who withstood Mīrzā Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal's claims were marked out for death. And in Baghdad, Mullah Rajab Ali Tahir and his brother Haji Mīrzā Ahmad al-Siraj, Haji Mīrzā Muhammad Reza, and several others fell one by the knife or bullet of the assassin. As to the assassination of the three Azalis, Agha Jan Bey, Haji Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan, and Mīrzā Reza Quli of Tafish, by some of Baha'u'llah's followers in Accra, there can, I fear, be little doubt. The passage in the Kitab al-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah's Book of Laws, alluding apparently to Haji Sayyid Muhammad's death, proves that Baha'u'llah regarded this event with some level of complacency, unquote. Attempting to set up Subh-i-Azal personally and make serious trouble for him and his devotees with the Ottoman authorities directly, the Baha'i partisans then manufactured a series of inflammatory pamphlets they attributed to Subh-i-Azal, even forging his signature, in which there was expressed outright designs on the Ottoman throne and attempts to overthrow it on the part of Subh-i-Azal. So they were trying to set up Subh-i-Azal. These pamphlets were distributed at night by Baha'i zealots at the homes of officials in Aderna, especially one at the home of its governor. I have personally experienced a lot of this stuff. At this point, Ottoman officials were already appraised of the violent escalation of the schism acted, and so in August 1868, banished Subh-i-Azal, his family, some of his remaining supporters, as well as 4 Baha'is to the island of Cyprus in the town of Famagusta, while banishing Baha'u'llah, his family, his supporters, and 4 devotees of Subh-i-Azal to Acre in Palestine. They arranged matters in such a way as an initiative to spy on them, thereby enabling themselves to henceforth keep abreast of the activities of each camp, especially of visitors who may come from elsewhere. However, the Baha'is managed to kill all 4 of the Bayānis sent with them en route, with the remaining shortly after arrival in Acre. So they killed the people that the Ottomans, the Bayānis or the Azalis that the Ottomans sent with the Baha'is were murdered en route. At this point, the Babi ecclesia was to be split forever into the 2 rival Azali and Baha'i camps, with the Baha'is utilizing the machinery they had already acquired earlier to great success to expand themselves. And I was also argued with the help of Western imperialists and the Russian Tsarists. This, while projecting their own reimagined, usually falsified, conflated, rewritten, and thoroughly revised sectarian narratives of history onto the past, while generally suppressing the values, beliefs, aspirations, views, and accounts of the earlier movement. The Bab himself was now relegated by the Baha'is as a mere herald and forerunner of Baha'u'llah, with his ideas and stature demoted and sanitized to accord more the new Baha'i doctrines. Subh-i-Azal was completely and categorically and unashamedly demonized by them, as he has ever since. Some of the works of the Bab and Subh-i-Azal, and especially earlier pre-schism histories that were deemed injurious to Baha'i interests, were either searched out and destroyed, suppressed, or altogether concealed from their own rank and file faithful and the public at large. The Bayānis were to henceforth go underground, maintain their religious beliefs privately, and practice taqiyya, and redirect their efforts towards the path of political activism and social reform in Iran in the fight against the Qajar despotism and the unchecked power of the clergy. For Subh-i-Azal, the next 43 years of his exile after 1868 were to be spent in relative seclusion in Famagusta, Cyprus, where surrounded by some of his family and occasional visits by devoted relatives and believers, he was to find some measure of peace, security, and freedom, particularly after the transference of the island from Ottoman to British control in 1878, following the Russo-Turkish War. Here he was to pursue long, fruitful correspondences with the outside world, particularly Europeans, amongst those being the French diplomat turned Babi, Alphonse Louis Daniel ALM Nicolas, who died in 1939, and Cambridge Orientalist and historian Edward Granville Browne, who died in 1926. Both were to personally meet the Subh-i-Azal and his family twice and more times in Famagusta, Cyprus. Many copies of the works of the Bab, as well as his own, either hand copied by himself or by his son Rizwan Ali, or arranged through other Babi scribes like Mirza Mustafa Khatib in Iran, were to begin finding their way into European Orientalist manuscript library collections at this period, especially those that are at the Cambridge University, the British Museum Library, and the few that exist in the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris. There was no attempt by Subh-i-Azal or his family and those devotees within there to propagate the Babi doctrine outright in Cyprus, but it appears that he was considered as some kind of Muslim holy figure by the locals. In fact, what happens is quite interesting because Subh-i-Azal and his family begin a very close and intimate relationship with the true prominent Sufi orders of the island, the Qadri Sufi order of Abdul Qadir Gilani and the Naqshbandis. They became quite intimate with the Azal family and Subh-i-Azal personally, and every year, which is even attested to by Mujan Momen in his silly article, The Cyprus Exile, the Naqshbandis and the Qadris would visit Subh-i-Azal for Bayān. After an illness lasting 9 months that progressively worsened and surviving his older stepbrother and rival by nearly 2 decades, excuse me, Subh-i-Azal died at 7 o'clock in the morning of Monday, April 29th, 1912, at approximately 80 to 81 years of age. He was buried in a lot adjoining Famagusta's common Muslim cemetery, then only a mile outside of the city. The local Qadri and Naqshbandi Sufi sheikhs who had befriended him and his family attended his funeral and offered the final rites and prayers of burial. Some years later, the Bayāni community built a modest structure as a shrine over it that still stands to this very day. Subh-i-Azal's first marriage occurred when he was 16, 17 years of age, and it was to one Fatima Khanum, who bore him his first son named Mirza Muhammad Hadi. This wife and son were left behind following the disturbance in Taqur Nur after the botched assassination attempt on Nasruddin Shah, when Subh-i-Azal, hearing of this event, took flight to Baghdad. He later married Maryam Khanum, also known as Qanate. She bore him Aghaya Nur. He had other sons as well as daughters by other wives, 2 of whom married the founding fathers of the Iranian constitutional revolution, Sheikh Ahmed al-Ruhi, who died in 1896, and Mirza Khan Kermani, who also died in 1896. Momen's tendentious and very silly article entitled The Cyprus Exile lists a total of 17 wives together with the names of the offspring resulting from these marriages. However, there is reason to remain cautious and incredulous of that number and the specifics he provides, because contrary to Momen's claimed number, Badiya Nerati Nuri, a kinswoman of Subh-i-Azal, in her Vaqā'i Rastin Taqur Nur, the true events of Taqur Nur, lists only 6 wives in all during Subh-i-Azal's entire life. And these were not all at the same time, but successive. It is possible Momen has confused some Bayāni devotees for actual spouses, but knowing that we know what the Baha'is do and the kind of facts they manufacture out of thin air, that is unlikely. Mm-hmm. The question of succession to Subh-i-Azal now is a very interesting and thorny question, because the sources seem to be all over the place about what actually occurred. Initially, Subh-i-Azal had nominated Hadi Dawlat Abadi, a very prominent cleric and close intimate companion of Subh-i-Azal, to succeed him. Now the question is, in what capacity? And the writings of Subh-i-Azal remain a little bit vague on that, but likely is that he had nominated Hadi Dawlat Abadi to be the most prominent witness of the Bayān, a Shaheed. But Hadi Dawlat Abadi dies during the height of the Constitutional Revolution, not long after the bombing of the Majlis building by the Russians and Muhammad Ali Shah in 1908. So in 1912, just a few months out from his own passing, Subh-i-Azal nominated Hadi Dawlat Abadi's oldest son, Yaḥyā Dawlat Abadi, to basically take over the role that his father Hadi would have taken. Yaḥyā Nūrī was not nominated in the capacity of a witness of the Bayān per the will and testament of the Bab. In the absence of mirrors to the Bayān, the cause of the Bayān devolves upon its witnesses. And so, since no one of Subh-i-Azal's capacity or like had emerged per that same will and testament, basically Subh-i-Azal nominated Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, the son of Hadid al-Tabadi, to be the first among the equals amongst the circle of the witnesses of the Bayān, who at the time were all in Iran. At the time, Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal was not in Iran. He was either in France or the UK at the time. There's a little bit of confusion as to what actually happened, given the succession notice that Subh-i-Azal had sent to him. One of the more popular and controversial sources that circulates in Iranian literature, that is coming from a book penned by Hossein Makki titled Amir Kabir, about the life of Mīrzā Yaḥyā Kabir, claims that Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal almost immediately after the death of Subh-i-Azal was in Tehran. That is not the case. And then there is a certain gathering that this account alleges to have occurred in Tehran, participated by 43 Bayānis of Tehran. Based on my discussions with the members of the family of Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, this gathering wouldn't have happened in that period of 1912. The possibility is it either happened in 1914, 1916, when Yaḥyā came back briefly to Iran, or it possibly occurred in 1934, when Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal had a official position from the government of Iran to represent the Iranian government in a international gathering in Belgium, in Brussels. So we're not clear exactly what happened, but the claim of these popular accounts in Farsi is that in this gathering, Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal had forced these 43 individuals to give him a vow of allegiance, and upon which effectively Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal had basically told these 43 individuals to completely abandon the practice of the Bayān and to go into the mainstream Shiite orthodoxy. The members of the family claim that this event happened exactly in the way that is recounted, except the dates are garbled. I don't know what to make of this event, because a witness of the Bayān never had the kind of authority to basically, abandon the Bayān. So, what I have instructed a lot of the Bayānis that come to me about this incident is that if it happened in the way that it is described, Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal effectively forfeited his position as the witness of the Bayān, because he had held no such authority. But this creates a bit of a conundrum, because Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal had then, subsequent to himself, appointed a gentleman that is actually a distant relative from my father's side, Muhammad Sadiq Ibrahimi, to succeed him as a witness of the Bayān. And if this event of giving him an apostolic succession occurred after this event with the 43 individuals, then this raises questions about the legitimacy of Muhammad Sadiq Ibrahimi's own position as witness of the Bayān. Nevertheless, what it looks like is that the instructions that Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal gave to these 43 Bayānis, whom we don't know who they are, and I have questioned and queried the Bayānis of Tehran, Kerman, and elsewhere about the identities of these 43 individuals. They don't know. Most of the Bayānis didn't really follow with this instruction of Yaḥyā Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, including the members of his own family, such as his sister Sadiqah Nūrī Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, and the children of Sadiqah, such as Qanar Taj and Fakhriye. None of them followed this instruction of Yaḥyā, and during the period of the Pahlavi dynasty, these people openly identified themselves as Bayānis and were quite active. And when these individuals went to Cyprus in the late 1940s, it was as a result of their efforts that we got lithograph publications of some of the works of the Bab in Iran during the late 1940s, such as the Persian Bayān, some of the works of Subh-i-Azal, the autograph epistles of the Bab, and those in the hand of Sayyid Hussein Yazdi. This was all done through the efforts of Qamar Taj and Fakhriye Dolatabadi, as well as the kinswoman of Subh-i-Azal, Atiya Ruhi, etc. So this was the tumultuous life of Subh-i-Azal. As I mentioned the last time, presently I have counted upwards of 138 volumes of works by Subh-i-Azal. Some of these works are extensive, being several hundred pages in length. The bulk of these works are in Arabic, and probably less than a third are in Persian. Another third are correspondences, lengthy correspondences, and the rest are official works, most of them which are written in what they say, Shana Ayat, the mode of writing in verses, which is an imitation of the verses of the Quran. Many of these works are unmatched, such as, for example, Kitab an-Nur, Book of Light, which was written in the early Baghdad period. Other works of Subh-i-Azal include works such as his Akhlaq al-Ruhani, whose concluding prayer we'll read later, which is a text on spiritual wayfaring from the point of view of ethics, which is a very interesting text. Very few manuscripts of this work exist. I presently only have a single complete Arabic copy of this. Incomplete copies are the norm. There's one incomplete copy in Cambridge, which I looked at. There's none in Paris. Then one of his most interesting works, which I have translated in three drafts already, and the fourth draft was probably forthcoming, is a book entitled The Seven Worlds, where Subh-i-Azal basically details the geosophical landscapes of mystical wayfaring based on the seven attributive imprints of God in Shia Hadith. And this work is just an absolutely exquisitely beautiful piece of work on the mystical quest, and the kind of mystical landscapes that he lays out in this work are just absolutely awesome. I've read this text, and it's only about 67, 68 pages long in length. I keep going back to this text and read it again and again and again and again and again. And each time I walk away from it, I get something new out of it. There are only four known texts of this. Two of them are in the handwriting of Subh-i-Azal himself, one in the hand of his son Rezvan Ali, which is in part of the collection in Paris at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Then there are some very fascinating correspondences of Subh-i-Azal with the Sufis of the island of Cyprus, particularly two of its Qadiri sheikhs and one of the Naqshbandi sheikhs there. These I will eventually translate as well. And then copious prayers of just unbelievably exquisite depth. Once you think you have found the ultimate prayer by Subh-i-Azal amongst this collection, then you go into another collection, you found something else that just hits you, and for days you just can't move from just the saturation of the beauty and exquisiteness of some of these prayers. But here I want to read now this prayer.
Yes.
That is attached to the seven worlds.
I'm absolutely fascinated.
Let me read you. This was the prayer that I translated for the article, where people can access this afterwards. This prayer is attached to the seven worlds and is basically a summary of the contents of the seven worlds itself. And it starts as, and I read it only in English. Let me see. I've got the wrong document here. Here we are. Okay. In thy name, O my God, and high be thy state. Glorified art thou, O my God. Verily I beseech thee by thy sublimity, uluwiyatika. At its most supreme, for the totality of thy sublimity is truly high with thee. Then, with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the whole of thy sublimity. Glorified art thou, O my God. Verily, I beseech thee by the banner, liwa, of thy peerless self-subsistence, qayyumiyatika, by its highest elevation, for the complete standard of thy logos command. Amr is truly lofty with thee. Then, with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the whole of thy standard. Glorify art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by thy right or plenitude, yameen, of thy tremendousness, at its most expansive, for the totality of thy plenitude is truly vast with thee. Then with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the totality of thy plenitude. Glorify art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by thy kingdom, malakutika, at its utmost height, for the whole of thy kingdom is truly appraised with thee. Then with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the whole of thy kingdom. Glorified art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by thy exaltation, hamadiyatika, at the acme of its laudation, for the whole of thy exaltation is truly praised with thee. Then, with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the totality of thy exaltation. Glorified art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by thy tender graciousness, manika, at its most primeval, for all of thy graciousness is truly ancient with thee. Then, with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the whole of thy graciousness. Glorified art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by the durationless eternality, dayumiyatika, and its utmost ceaselessness, for the whole of thy durationlessness is truly constant with thee. Then, with the mother of the utterance that is thine, O my God, I verily beseech thee by the totality of thy durationless eternity. Glorified art thou, O my God, verily I beseech thee by the heavenly waters of the letter Ain, Bahr al-Ain, the heavenly waters of thy might, Azamatika, and the sublimity of thy power, Uluva Qudratika, and the world of thy lordship, Alam al-Ruyatika, and the supremacy of thy tremendousness, Allah Izzatika, and by the heavenly waters of the letter Lam, Bahr al-Lam, the heavenly waters of thy magnanimity, Latafiyatika, and the banner of the sovereignty of thy peerless self-subsistence, Liwa as-Sultana Qayyumiyatika, and by the heavenly waters of the letter Ya, Bahr al-Ya, the heavenly waters of the plenitude of thy lordship, Yameen al-Rububiyatika, and the certainty of the essence of thy oneness, Yaqeen al-Zat al-Wahdaniyatika, and the fullness, perfection of the arrangement that is thine, Tamam al-Adad al-Ladayka, and the consummation of the logos command of thy singularity, Itmam Amr Fardaniyatika, and by the heavenly waters of the letter Mim, Bahr al-Mim, the heavenly waters of thy kingdom, Malakutika, and thy possessive dominion over all things, Malikiyatika, Kull Shay, and the manifestations of thy loftiness, Mazahir Rafatika, and by the heavenly waters of the letter Ha, Bahr al-Ha, of thy penetrating decree, Hukmika al-Nafith, within that which is created and the life forever abiding, Hayat al-Baghiyah, in the worlds of thy peerless subsistence, Awalim al-Qayyumiyatika, and by the heavenly waters of the second letter Mim, Bahr al-Mim al-Thani, and what thou hast placed upon it of a state sublime, Ulu al-Shan, and the splendor of the empyrean of power, Baha al-Jabarut, and the majesty of the divine realm, Jalal al-Lahut, and the luminescence of the angelic realm, Di'a al-Malakut, and the supremacy of the mightiest world, Ala al-Azamut, and by the heavenly waters of the letter Dal, Bahr al-Dal, the perpetuity of the sovereignty of thy holiness, Dawam al-Sultana Qudusiyatika, and the permanence of the sovereign rule of thy glorification, Istidama Malika Subh-i-Azal, and the durationlessness of thy logoic selfhood, Daimumiya Nafsaniyatika, and that which thou hast placed upon it of the perpetual states from the realm of thy divinity, دوام شؤونات لاهوتيتك, and the vestigial signs of the sovereignty of thy peerless self-subsistence. علامات السلطان قيوميتك, and by these the seven heavenly waters and the seven worlds, الأبحر السبعة وعوالم السبعة, and the magnified spirits of holiness, الأرواح المؤزمة المقدسة, and the metaphysical subtleties of greatness and mightiness, مشاعر الكبرياء والعظمة, and the epiphanic setting placements of grandeur and power, المواقع العزة والقدرة, and the binding knots of mercy, severity, and sovereign dominion, المقاعد الرحمة والهيبة والملكنة, and the manifestations of grandeur, excuse me, مظاهر العزة, what thou hast placed upon it of sublime majesty and wealth, and the apogee of beauty and the dawned countenance. I beseech thee that thou bestowest upon me what thou hast placed upon it or them of beatific excellence, by thy spiritual attraction of glory, jazbika al-majd, and noble beneficence or existence, O possessor of beneficence. Glorified art thou, no other God is there besides thee. For I beseech thee, O my God, by that which I have entreated thee therein, yonder of thy greatest names, and thy gracious spirits, and thy vertical signs of primordial might, and thy exalted, abounding, overflowing heavenly waters. I beseech thee that ye ordain for me what thou hast ordained, preordained by thy logos self from before temporality, that thou bestow upon me from thy presence the heavenly delight of divine proximity, and the sovereignty with thee that is victorious and assured. And I beseech thee that thou dignify my soul, ta'azza nafsi, above all things with thy self-sufficiency, when what thou hast created in the kingdom of the earth, when thou hast fashioned in the celestial empyreans, the material creation and the cause command. And I beseech thee that thou empower me, within the purifying month of deliverance, the Shahr Takhlis, that is thine with thee, of what thou hast determined through thy logos self, and that thou account me among the company of those fasting, those prayerful, those elevated, those appraised, those sincere, those abstaining, those righteous, those striving, those informed, those ripened, those Gnostic, those knowing, those steadfast, those pious. No other God is there besides thee. Bestow upon me, O my God, from thy mercy that is most vast with thee, and for all thy sustenance provided in thy kingdom, I give felicitations. Glorified art thou, no other God is there besides thee, and blessings be upon the point and its manifestations, just like thou hast shed blessings upon him from the rank of pre-eternity and the sublimity of primordiality. Glorified art thou. Verily, I am of those who invoke. Amen. This prayer uses the letters of the Bab's names, Ali Muhammad, to draw the attributes of God. So it is both a prayer to the Bab and to the Godhead simultaneously through the letters of the name. And that's the 7 letters of the name of the Bab, Ali Muhammad. And this is basically, in summary, what the Treatise of the Seven Worlds is all about in the form of the prayer.
Sheikh, I am absolutely fascinated. This has been such a treat. And for the audience that's listening, part 11 of the life and teachings of Subh-i-Azal, and all of the things that revolve around his teachings of who he is and his true background, without any censorship or suppression of any kind. As Sheikh has pointed out, that a lot of his works are still yet to be translated. And we hope, inshallah, in our lifetimes, that all of those works get translated into English. So all of his works, including the Bab's teachings, everything is put out there for the seekers of light that are looking to further expand their journey. Whether you're a Bayani or you're on the spiritual path, it's all part of this collective journey where we're standing for righteousness. It's either you're on the side of righteousness or you're not. That's what it comes down to in the end. And all of the links that Sheikh has provided me in reference to this part 11 podcast, I will put in the description below. And it's so amazing how Subh-i-Azal is the true successor of the Bab, and how these elements and these agents of chaos came in between to try to destroy his image and destroy his life teachings. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of all planners, and the teachings God put out here, and they will continue to be immortalized by those that are willing to look for it. And I am just absolutely fascinated with the Sheikh's teachings. And this is why I reiterate, he is our guide, he is our murshid, our friend in these times of darkness, when the people are feeling hopeless about the future, about so many elements that you can look into in all parts of the world. We need a revitalization of these teachings now more than ever. We need it. We need the Bab's guidance and teachings. We need Subh-i-Azal's guidance and teachings, and Sheikh Wahid Azal's guidance and teachings. So please support our Sheikh and help his cause. By helping his cause, you're helping the light win against the darkness. And again, I am truly in awe and grateful for part 11. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you, Sheikh, in all that you do.
Thank you. I will say, let me say before we leave, let me say this. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger once made the very famous statement, the language is the house of being.
Yes.
And, you know, when he said that, he was basically also thinking about, you know, the role of poetry in philosophy and just in the question of being itself. Now, you know, poetry obviously, you know, abides at a very high status in that level of being, of Dasein, in the way that Heidegger categorized it. But when you're in the presence of these prayers, whether by the Bab, Subh-i-Azal, or even the Imams, which is where a lot of these prayers are inspired by,
yes,
we're on a completely different level here. You know, this is beyond even poetry. Because for me, at least, and I know other people who engage with these sorts of du'as over a long time, and the zikrs, etc., this literally takes you into that world, into the presence of the divine itself.
yes.
And you know, one lady one time who I gave some of these prayers to work with in Germany, she said to me, you know, she said, I didn't realize how much my inner eye was clouded from the divine presence until I started engaging with these prayers. And it had a very subtle effect on me over a week, where I literally felt my subtle bodies beginning to open up every morning when I was reading these prayers, these translations of the prayers of Subh-i-Azal and the Bab that you gave to me. And, you know, this was a confirmation for me of my own experiences, because this is exactly how I was, you know, relating to this stuff, and also how Royal was relating to this.
Yes.
So these things have power. And, you know, perhaps one of the ways of saving the world is to bombard it with beauty of this level. And where the beauty of this level has to do with the reality of its creator, you know, and its theophany and its light. You know, unfortunately, in the secular world that we're living in, and you know, whatnot, you know, people have a difficult time. But when these prayers have this kind of an effect on certain Europeans with spiritual inclinations, right? I say we go for broke and let us bombard the world, you know, with the jihad of beauty, you know, jihad al-jamal, you know, and let us appraise people. And, you know, it's not just the Bab or Subh-i-Azal or the Ma'sumun. Also, you have these amazing prayers by Ibn Arabi and a lot of the Mashayikh Tasawwuf. Scholarship doesn't like to look at prayers for some reason, although, you know, you have endless dissertation about poetry and poets. But very few books that discuss prayer and the reality of prayer. I mean, I can count on maybe two hands and no more the number of credible studies in English or any European language on prayer in Islam, you know. And I think this needs to change, because, and especially now in these times where you have all these people interested in the work of Martin Heidegger and his student like Hans-Georg Gadamer, the very things that these people talked about and lamented were present. Of course, they didn't know about it because they didn't know Arabic. But, you know, I even challenged someone like, you know, Alexander Dugin, who, you know, who claims to be a acolyte and disciple of Martin Heidegger, to look at some of this stuff for himself. I'm not trying to turn you into a Bayāni, you know, keep your orthodoxy in the way that you want it. But look at some of these prayers of Subh-i-Azal. There's a lot more where that came from. I'm happy to give you endless streams of these things, because this is also my food in many ways. Look at this. This is the language of being. This is the house of being speaking to you directly as the logos that you, Mr. Alexander Dugan, seem to have a little bit of a hard time with when you write about the metaphysics of chaos. But, you know, this sort of language in the presence of chaos, that chaos is merely a shadow in its presence. So let me conclude now, before we go, with this final prayer from Subh-i-Azal's Risalah Akhlaq al-Ruhaniyya, the ethics of the spiritually minded. This is the concluding prayer of that work. He says, glorified art thou, O God, my God. I indeed testify to thee in all things at the moment when I am in thy presence in pure servitude. Upon this, the verily thou art God. No other God is there besides thee. Thou art unchanged, O my God, within the elevation of grandeur and majesty, and shall be unalterable, O my Desirous boon, within the pinnacle of power and perfection, inasmuch as nothing shall frustrate thee and nothing shall extinguish thee. Thou art unchanged as thou art the capable above thy creation, and thou art unalterable as thou indeed shall be as from before, inasmuch as nothing is with thee of anything, and nothing is in thy rank of anything. Thou accomplisheth and willeth and doeth and desireth. Glorified art thou, O God, my God, with thy praise. Salutations be upon the primal point, the chemis of thy visage, and the light of thy direction, and the luminosity of thy beinghood, and the clarity of thy selfhood, and the ocean of thy power, by all that which thou hast bestowed upon him of thy stations, and thy culminations, and thy foundations. For nothing shall frustrate thee of anything, and nothing shall extinguish thee of anything. No other God is there besides thee, for verily thou art the Lord of all the worlds. And blessings, O God, my God, be upon the one who was the first to believe in thee, the visage of thy selfhood and the decree of thy direction, and upon the one who was the last to believe in thee, the essence of thy direction and the visage of thy holiness, and upon whom thou hast made martyrs or witnesses, shuhada, unknown except by thy command, nor restrained except by thy wisdom. Then upon those whom thou hast promised that thou shalt make manifest on the day of resurrection, and he whom thou shalt upraise on the day of thy return, by all of that which thou wilt bestow upon him of thy power and thy strength. For nothing shall extinguish thee, and nothing shall frustrate thee. Thou determinest all things, for verily thou art powerful over whatsoever thou wilt. And I indeed testify, O my God, between thy hands, that verily there is no other God besides thee, and that he whom thou shalt make manifest on the day of resurrection is the chemist of thy creativity, and the visage of thy manifestation, and the direction of thy victory, and the substance of thy pardoning, and the branch of thy singularity, and the clarity of thy Unitarianism, and the pen of the letter Nun, al-qalam al-Nun, within thy beinghood, and the setting of the cause command within thy essentiality, inasmuch as there is no difference between him and thee, except that he is thy servant in thy grasp, such that whatsoever is in the heavens and the earth and what is between them will then be filled by his name and by his light, until it be made apparent that no other God is there besides thee, and no beloved is there unto thee, and no desired one is there other than thee, and no dread is there of thy like, and no justice of thy equal. No other God is there besides thee. Glorified art thou, O God, and by thy praise, blessings, O my God, be upon the guide to the throne of the hidden cloud, and the path to thy presence in the Sinai of authorization, and the caller to thy logos self, and the crier of thy permission between thy hands, and the ariser of thy attendance by thy command. Then the triumph, O my God, by all that which thou will bestow upon him of thy power. Then that which will be made manifestly apparent of the word upon the earth, and what is upon it of thy grandeur, and also in this that nothing shall ever put out his light. Verily, nothing shall frustrate thee of anything, and nothing shall extinguish thee of anything. Thy mercy encompasseth all things, and verily thou art powerful over what thou hast willed, and to the one who prays to thee, thou art the hearing, the answering. For verily thou art observant over us, and verily indeed thou art high, praised beyond that which the blaze fluxes can comprehend. Amen.
Ameen. Thank you, Sheikh. This has been a pleasure and an honor and such a treat. Thank you. So for all the audience that's listening, please support Sheikh Wahid Azal's work, and also a fundraiser for his late wife, Roya, rest in peace, which will be included in the links in the description below. And all of the parts that are done from 1 through 11, including this one, watch it multiple times, because even myself, I re-listened to the Sheikh's teaching, and I always take something away. And for that, I am grateful for the privilege and his presence in this world. For right now, we're living in times of darkness, and only love can defeat this enemy, love and knowledge. Because the more love that we have, and your heart is good, you're spreading light and beauty like Subh-i-Azal's teachings, no enemy on this world can stop you. Whether you're Bayāni or any other spiritual path, it's your heart and the teachings that will overcome this evil that we're in. Thank you.
Inshallah. Inshallah.